I want you to take a minute and tell me about your dreams. Tell me about where you want to go in life. I want you to take a minute and tell me what goals you have. Now, this may not sound religious, but it still needs to be said. I'm challenging you to think about where you want to go. I'm challenging you to think about what your goals are. And I'm challenging you to answer the question why you don't have what you desire as of yet. This is not a condescending video. Before I share with you what I'm going to share with you, I will first raise my hand and tell you that I have gone through this process. And the reason why I use the word challenge is because sometimes it's a challenge in and of itself, not necessarily to dream. It's not a challenge to project. It's not a challenge to desire, but there's a challenge to acknowledge where you are at this point in your life. Why? Because perhaps where you are in your life right now, in your own perspective, brings some sort of shame, some sort of embarrassment, some sort of overwhelming feeling. And so, because of those things that I've just mentioned, that compels you to make excuses, that compels you to look at things from a perspective that hinders you rather than help you. So what I wanted to talk about today, I wanted to kind of get us refocused on some things in our lives concerning where we desire to go. And I want to talk about God's still small voice. Now, before you say, oh God, not another religious video. This is not so much a religious video, but I want to address some things that need to be addressed that I feel might push us past the wall that we've been bumping into over and over and over again, and finally get us some traction on the ground where we can begin to travel in the direction that we desire to go. God's still small voice. What does it mean to listen to God's still small voice especially concerning where we desire to go in life? There's a stillness in God's voice. There's a smallness in God's voice. A lot of times when we think about God's voice, accreditation to Hollywood, we think, the voice, the tone of my voice, like, Daryl, I want you to go out, and if you want a car, I want you to go to the lot, and I want you to tell the salesperson that I have sent you there to get a Lamborghini. The salesperson will probably look at you and say, well, you go back and tell your God that it all depends on your credit and how much money you have to pay down. God's still small voice. There's a stillness in God's voice. There's no wavering. What he tells you to do, you don't have to second guess it. You don't have to say, was that God saying that to me? Or was that something else? Or was that my own imagination? You know when God has spoken to you. You know what God has said to you. But the problem is you don't want to acknowledge it because it doesn't sound grandiose in the things that he's telling you to do. The steps that he's telling you to do, it doesn't sound big. And so what happens is we have this perception of God. And a lot of us have said, well, I'm waiting on God. And when we think about it in its entirety, what you're saying is, I'm waiting for God to intervene. I'm waiting for God to do something. I'm waiting for God's hand to reach down from heaven and throw me a bucket of cash. I'm waiting for God to wipe off my debt. I'm waiting for God to do this for me. Haven't you ever seen those posts? And haven't you ever seen people go, won't he do it? Won't he do it? Well, the stillness of God's voice and what he tells you to do is just that. He's telling you things that you need to do. And a lot of times we sensationalize God's voice. And so what that has a tendency to do in our mindset is, if it's not sensational and if it's not miraculous and if it's not big, it's not God. And that's a lie. God's word comes in a small package of a seed. It says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, then you can speak to the mountain. In other words, if you're faithful over the small things that God has told you to do, as you're a good steward and you water those small things, he will make you ruler over many things. But what is happening over the years, I've heard people with good intentions, if you're doing something simple, then it's not God. Because the God I serve tells me to do the impossible. The God I serve tells me to do the unthinkable, the unimaginable. That's the God I serve. And the problem that I have with that is, a lot of times the impossible things that God is telling us to do really has nothing to do with the size or the spectacularness, if that's such a word, of the task. But it's more in the simple things that he asks us to do. And what seems impossible to man is that God could speak and ask you to do something simple, such as clean up your credit, such as save enough money to put a down payment on whatever it is you desire, such as pay off this debt. Oh, that can't be God. Why? Because it's not spectacular. It's not grandiose. Look at Abraham. Okay, well, let's talk about Abraham. Didn't God tell Abraham to do one thing? And what was that? He told Abraham, Abraham, pack up your stuff and leave your country. That's it. Now, he also gave Abraham a promise. I'm going to make you a father of many nations. But how many people know that if Abraham didn't do that simple thing, which is to just get up, pack up, and go, simple, that promise is null and void. Abraham acknowledged where he was starting from. What we have to realize is that we have to learn how to acknowledge where we are. We have to learn how to acknowledge where we're starting from. A lot of us have goals of where we want to go. A lot of us desire a big house. A lot of us desire a private plane. A lot of us desire a fancy car. A lot of us desire even just a comfortable way of living. A lot of us desire a business. But then when it comes to going to a seminar to get knowledge, or going to a bank to find out, what do I need to do to get approved for this loan, or looking and researching grants, that becomes impossible to man because it's not sensationalized enough. It's not spectacular enough. So therefore, it cannot be God, because my God is spectacular. My God is, he's just over the top God. So if he tells me to pick up the toothbrush and brush my teeth, that's the devil. That's not God. That's too simple. And my God is not simple like that. And I wanted to address that because the still small voice of God, in his stillness, he's asking us to do Simple things. If you're not where you want to be yet, I say yet because I want to see us all get there. If you're not where you want to be, I would say, first of all, look at what you have in your hands. Or look at what you have currently in your arsenal. And part of that is acknowledging where you are. You cannot gain direction if you don't know where you're starting from. Again, you cannot gain direction if you don't know where you're starting from, or you cannot gain direction if you don't embrace where you're starting from. If you don't acknowledge where you're starting from, you cannot gain direction. And so my challenge to you and my challenge to all of us today is to look at where we are and embrace it, acknowledge it. There's no shame in where you are. We all make mistakes, but there's no shame in where you are. There shouldn't be any shame in where you are. There shouldn't be any shame in who you are. We all start at different levels, but we have a desire to go wherever we want to go. But if you don't acknowledge your starting point, you will never gain direction. Everybody knows where they want to go, but they don't know where they're starting. A GPS cannot calculate where you ought to go if they do not know your starting point, whether you punch it in or not. It'll say, if you don't punch it in, it'll say your location is here. Even back in the days when you pull over and you ask someone, how do I get to such and such? They'll pull open their map and they'll say, okay, you're here. You're not going to look at them and say, no, I'm not. I'm not here. I'm at 500 miles west of here, where you say I am. You have to learn how to acknowledge that you're here. This is where you are. Acknowledge it. Oh, my credit is this. Acknowledge it. Embrace it. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is where you're going to be. Oh, my debt is this. Acknowledge it. Embrace it. Don't run away from it. Oh, I only have this amount of money. I don't have enough money to put down on it. Acknowledge it. The moment you acknowledge it, you know your starting point. You cannot move from one place to the next until you have 2 points, one at the beginning and one at the end. My time is up. I thank you for yours, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next video.